And finally, for this week, we're going to look at The Duty to Die by John Hardwig. Now, one of the reasons why I like to present this article is because it presents sort of the extreme view regarding active euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide. Hardwig says both of those should clearly be morally permissible, not just because we might have a right to die based on the principle of autonomy, but it might actually be our moral duty to die, because some of us can live too long. Our lives can go on too long, and this can be a burden on others. And so we might have a moral responsibility to end our lives to stop those bad effects on other people. So it's far more controversial than most of the stuff we've been trying to justify so far. So let's see what Hardwig has to say here. So the first thing to note is that Hardwig's view is based primarily on his insight that the literature on euthanasia has made a crucial mistake. So everything we've been reading so far seems to focus solely on the patient, or maybe the patient and the doctor relationship, but it's incorrectly focusing too narrowly, right? It shouldn't just focus only on the patient or the patient and the doctor. Many other people are affected by these decisions, right? So it should instead focus both on the patient, maybe the doctor as well, and the effects the illness or the continued life or euthanasia may have on the patient's families or loved ones. Right, so Hardwig is saying, look, in this literature, we've been focusing too narrowly. We need to broaden our focus. We need to look at the effects on everyone involved, right? And we've been ignoring these families, and they're ones who are very heavily impacted by these decisions as well. So here's at least some ways. There are probably many more, but these are a few that Hardwig appeals to. These are some ways we can affect others when we live too long or death comes too late. And specifically, he has our families or loved ones in mind. Right, so we can have a negative effect on these people emotionally. Right? It can drain the family to care for you. Right, caring for a sick loved one, especially a terminally sick loved one, is a daunting affair, right? It's a lot to deal with. It's a lot to see a family member suffer in this way, but then to sort of swallow your own feelings long enough to help take care of them. Can also emotionally drain them just to watch you degrade over time, right? To see somebody they love sort of slowly wither away can have a large emotional effect on individuals. We can also negatively affect our loved ones financially. So it's there's no doubt about the fact that long-term stays in hospitals can quickly bankrupt a family. There are numerous cases about this. You can read hundreds of them if you start looking it up, right? Especially without insurance, but even with insurance, long-term hospital stays can be so expensive that they can bankrupt a family. So you might say, well, just care for your family member at home, right? Don't leave them in the hospital. Get some at-home care, or if you can't afford at-home care, take care of your family members yourselves. And so some families do this, right? Some family members end up giving up their jobs to take care of the sick loved ones at home because that's more affordable than a long hospital stay. But now notice that family member has given up a source of income in order to take care of your sick loved one. So not only do they have this additional expense of the sick loved one, but now they've given up a source of income in order to take on those responsibilities. So even if you go that route, it can still have a large financial impact on families. And once again, there are many cases where a family member gives up a job to take care of a sick loved one and the family goes bankrupt because they no longer have the necessary income. And finally, we can negatively affect our loved ones' autonomy, right? So if they're stuck spending all of their time caring for us, then they don't have the ability or the power to exercise their self-determination. They don't have the power to go live their lives the way that they see fit, right? They have to spend so much of their time caring specifically for us. And so Hardwig wants to say, look, we can negatively affect our family members in so many ways, and these are strong negative effects that we can have on the lives of our family members. It's not just a minor inconvenience. These are things that can destroy people, right? Emotionally, financially, so on. They're some of the worst things that can happen to your family members. And so there may be circumstances where we have a duty to die in order to free our family members from the burden of caring for us or seeing us in this state. In other words, it would be our moral responsibility to end our lives before they go on too long and hurt those who we love the most. And you might say, well, isn't this going to depend on some specific facts about our situation? And Hardwig agrees. He says, look, there can really be no general principle here about who has a duty to die, right? He's not going to give us a blanket statement saying that everybody over the age of 70 in this wealth bracket, so on and so forth, will end up having a duty to die. He says, that's not how this goes. Each family is in a different environment. Each family has a different context, and these contexts are each morally relevant. And so, here's an example. Right, here's a context that's morally relevant. Some families can afford expensive home care. They can afford expensive hospital stays. And so for those families, they can have somebody else care for you, not take on all of the financial and autonomy burdens that normally come with caring for a loved one. And so it's much easier for those types of families to care for a sick loved one. Another relevant context would be maybe a family that can't afford expensive home care, but they happen to have a family member who doesn't work anyway, who can help take care of the sick loved one, or they have a family member who just isn't burdened by caregiving the way most of us would be. I know most people would have a very hard time helping their sort of parents use the bathroom and change their bedding, so on and so forth, administer medication, right? Seeing their family members wither away and lose their autonomy and have to take care of them in these ways is really negatively impactful on most people. But some people just aren't burdened by it. Some people can do it without sort of being weighed down by it, right? So maybe you have a family member who is in that context. And so if that's the context of your family, then maybe you don't have a duty to die, right? But what does this mean? And this is a very important part of Hardwig's overall argument, right? In other words, we're going to have to figure out what our context is, what our environment is. And that means that families are going to have these really difficult, meaningful conversations about our deaths and the burdens others are able to handle. Right? So we need to express to our family members how we would like our death to go, at what points we feel life is no longer worth living. And then we also need to discover from them how they would like to proceed, right? Can they handle the burden of caring for us financially, emotionally? Are they willing to? You would hope they are, but some people won't be. Right? We need to figure out what those contexts are. And so one benefit, Hardwig claims, is that this is going to bring the family closer together. It's going to sort of reify your relationships. It's going to show you how much you mean to each other because you're willing to sort of not bargain, but have these meaningful conversations about how you want your final, last, intimate moments with one another to go. Okay, so I sort of gave this up already. The main strength of Hardwig's argument is that he postulates those conversations we have about our death, the burdens we're able to bear, and so on, are going to help us all reaffirm the meaningfulness of our relationships with one another. Right, so this is, like I said, the main strength of his argument. It's going to bring you closer together as a family if you're willing to have these difficult, open discussions about death and care and how it needs to happen when it finally occurs. And so Hardwig also has some stuff to say about, well, if I have a duty to die, we need to determine who should kill me, right? Should I kill myself? Should my family members kill me? Should a doctor kill me? Once again, he's going to say it's going to depend on the context of your family, but there are two sort of general principles that he thinks are going to apply in every case. and this is here at the second point, doctors should be involved in all of these euthanasia cases or physician-assisted suicide cases. And that's primarily because doctors just have more knowledge and access to goods that can help make sure the euthanasia goes successfully and smoothly, right? So you don't traumatize yourself or your family members with botched suicide attempts, right? A doctor should be involved to make sure everything goes as smoothly and efficiently as possible. But in addition to that, he also thinks family members should be involved and they should be informed. Why is this? Well, because dropping this or surprising your family by them walking in and seeing a dead person on the couch because you committed physician-assisted suicide would be traumatizing, right? So your family members should be informed, and he thinks that when the act of death finally occurs, it shouldn't happen with the person in isolation. You shouldn't have to feel lonely or isolated in your final moments. And once again, he thinks if the family is involved in this scenario, it's only going to reaffirm the meaningfulness of your relationships with one another in the final moments of your life. So according to Hardwig, some people might have a duty to die because they could burden their family too much. But this isn't a bad thing, right? It's just part of having meaningful relationships with other people. And so our duty to die is a duty to them, a duty or responsibility that comes part and parcel with having people we love and care about. Okay, so quick thing to say, just in response to Hardwig, there are two sort of quick objections. One is, won't this disproportionately affect the most vulnerable of society, right? Because you'll end up having poor families who can't afford in-home care and they can't afford to take time off work to care for a loved one. And so being forced to care for their loved ones this way will be seen as more of a burden than it would be if they were rich, right? So we'd end up in a weird situation where the poor are going to have a duty to die more often than the rich simply because caring for these individuals will be more burdensome based on your economic bracket. But this doesn't seem right. We don't want the poor to have a duty to die more than the rich. It should be that we can balance how much of a burden we want to bear emotionally and morally, so on and so forth, without this being affected solely by the amount of income we have, right? But a response to this is just that, well, this is a problem with our society's distributive justice system, right? This is a problem with how society has currently distributed healthcare or how our society has made healthcare so unaffordable. But this isn't a problem with Hardwig's theory. It's just a problem with how do we apply it in this society. It looks like it's going to have bad effects here. So the problem would be, okay, let's fix society, and then we can correctly identify our duties to die. Second, and this one's more important, it seems to leave the power over our lives in the hands of the subjective preferences of others. So think of the following scenario. You and I both have the same sickness, right? We're both going to die. We're both going to need the same type of care, so on and so forth. But we could end up in a weird situation where I end up having a duty to die while you don't, simply because my family members deal with stress worse than yours, right? And so they deem me burdensome. So although both of us are in identical personal situations, I'm going to have a duty to die just because my families can't deal with stuff the way yours can. And this doesn't seem right either. This seems to strongly violate our intuitive ideas about autonomy, that we should be the ones who get to decide how our lives end. It shouldn't rely simply on the subjective preferences of those we happen to have as family members or fall in love with. Okay, and so finally, Hardwig claims that someone can be better off dead even if they have no terminal illness. This is something we've been talking about throughout the lectures this week, and it seems plausible. Right? If you think you can make the general calculation that your life is no longer worth living, this seems like it can apply whether or not you have a terminal illness. And so this would seem to apply, it would seem to justify active euthanasia and assisted suicide for instances of mental pain. Many people are scared about this because they think we're just going to end up killing people who could be healed by psychiatric care. But there are a number of strict rules in place in the countries where it's permissible. So now, go watch the 24 and Ready to Die video in order to get a better understanding of these things. And then we can discuss it in this week's discussion board. Thank you, everyone.